So today I'm going to share with you 4 fundamentals in order to become a successful freight broker. All right. If you want to start your own freight brokerage or become a freight broker or how to start a freight brokerage or how to start your own freight broker business, if those are questions that you've had on your mind, you're going to really enjoy this training because not only am I going to share with you how to start your freight brokerage, but I'm going to share with you how to become a successful freight broker. So lean in, pay close attention. Number 1 is sourcing and dispatching trucks. All right, so what does that mean? Well, as a freight broker or a freight agent, you're going to have some questions you need to understand, like how do I find and source carriers, motor carriers, trucking companies? Typically, when you start out as a freight broker, you're going to be using something called a load board like the DAT or Truck Stop or Direct Freight or any number of different load boards, which are websites. They're basically hubs where freight brokers and carriers come together to try to help service shippers. All right. So that is one of the things you're going to need to understand, finding and sourcing carriers. Another core question you're going to have is, how do I vet new carriers? How do I do a background check on new carriers to make sure to help ensure good service and to prevent fraud? Something like that. You're probably going to use the FMCSA Safer site, or maybe you're going to use some outsourced tool like Carrier 411 or Highway or CarrierOK.com. Those are all different SaaS products and software that can help you with that vetting process to ensure that your carriers are that are actually qualified to haul the freight. They have active authority and insurance and those things, but also to avoid fraud. All right. So that's number 2. Number 3, you're going to need to learn some dispatching best practices when you're dispatching the truck. And what I mean by dispatching is after you've covered the load, maybe you covered a load today, the load's going to pick up tomorrow. You're going to have to dispatch that driver into the pickup location, and then you're going to have to track that shipment through to delivery. So that's all part of the dispatch process. So there are best practices and mistakes to avoid. Those are core things that you're going to need to understand. And then last but not least, on the carrier side, you're going to need to learn how to develop strong carrier relationships. Because after you source a carrier from the load boards as a startup, you're going to then want to develop a relationship with them where you can continue to do business with them, recurring on different shipments that meet their specific needs as well as your customer specific needs. Okay. Number 2, you need to learn how to rate shipments. All right. So this is a question I get a lot. Dennis, how do I provide a freight quote? How do I rate shipments? How do I do this, Dennis? What do I need to do? Because, there's some nuances to it. So I'm going to share a couple of things you need to understand. First, you need to understand the difference in the types of shipments, like full truckload versus LTL versus partials, right? So those are different types of shipments, right? So you need to learn some of those fundamentals. You need to learn the difference between spot market rates and contract rates. All right. And so that's a very important one. Most freight brokers start in the spot market. One of the big things you need to understand as a broker is, how do I find the spot market rate from point A to point B? If my shipper has a load from Buffalo to Atlanta that's going on a flatbed, how do I know what it's going to cost me to pay a truck so that I can then add my margin on top and provide a freight quote? So you need to understand how to find the spot market rate. There's a process for that, right? And then last but not least, how much profit do I add? How much is fair? How much is reasonable? How much is expected, right? How much can I make on a shipment? Am I going to make $200 on a shipment, or am I going to make $20 on a ship? Well, the fact is from a full truckload perspective, most brokers earn between 10 and 20% on any given load. For example, if they charge the shipper $2,000, okay, that's the all-in rate to the shipper, they're typically going to make somewhere between $200 and $400 on that one shipment, with an average probably being somewhere in the 15% range, which would be about $300 in profit. Okay, so those are a couple of things you need to understand from a rating perspective. I actually did a training recently on steps for doing freight quotes, so you can probably see that here somewhere on the screen. And so, and by the way, listen, stick around for number 4, because number 4 is by far the most important skill, the most important fundamental that you have to learn in order to become a successful freight broker. Now, all of these are important, but number 4 is exponentially more important in my opinion. Okay. Number 3, financial management. All right, you need to learn the fundamentals of financial management. And I can tell you that this scares the bejesus out of most freight brokers. Why? Well, They probably don't handle their personal finances very well, so they're concerned with handling the business finances, and that's a legitimate concern. So there's questions like, what is factoring? How do I use other people's money? Factoring, just in a quick version, is it's kind of an alternative financing that allows you to pay your carriers before you get paid by your shippers. So it allows you to quickly pay carriers. Now, I'm not going to dive into a lot of detail, but that's how you're able to use other people's money and not have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in the bank waiting to pay carriers. You use factoring. Most freight broker startups use some form of factoring, okay? So that's an important part of financial management, right? How do I invoice shippers? What is the necessary paperwork? What do the invoices need to include? What does that look like? How do I actually invoice them? Is it done online? Is it done on paper? Is it EDI? How do I invoice my shippers, right? So that's a very important component. How do I make sure I pay my carriers on time? How do I pay my carriers? Do I send them a check? Is it an ACH? What other formats can I send carriers? Another question you need to understand is, basic bookkeeping. I mean, keeping some basic records, right? Keeping receipts, keeping all your documentations, making sure that your finances are clean, right? And then last but not least, on the financial management, you're going to need to learn how to pay taxes, right? You're going to have to pay some quarterly taxes for estimated income. You're going to need to pay some different income taxes, right? So you're going to need to file corporate taxes because you're probably going to have an LLC or an S Corp. And that I would strongly suggest that you outsource to a CPA or someone who's a financial advisor who's qualified on the financial side and the tax side to help you with that, okay? And that's all part of building a successful freight brokerage and a key component, what I teach in my Freight Broker Bootcamp online startup program. So if you're curious about becoming a freight broker or a freight agent, you can check it out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Again, we trained over 10,000 students and we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee. So you can check that out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com. All right. So, and last but not least, drum roll, please. Number 4 is freight broker sales and how to get shippers as a freight broker. This is one of the fundamentals that a lot of brokers struggle with. And they struggle because maybe they don't come from a sales background, or maybe they don't understand the sales process. They don't understand some of those key components, right? One of the key things here in freight broker sales is you need to create and identify your freight niche. You need to identify, what is my freight broker niche? Am I focused in on vans or flatbeds or reefers? Am I focused more on the steel industry, the produce industry? Is there a specific geography that I'm going to focus in on? Again, this is all covered in my Freight Broker Bootcamp startup program. Finding your niche is an important one. Second, you're going to want to learn how to create a list of potential shippers, of prospects, right? So if you're focused in on the oil and gas industry, what companies are you going to call? What companies are you going to contact? What companies are you going to prospect? Right? So you need to be able to create that list, and then you also need to understand how to do basic cold outreach, because chances are you're not going to know any of these companies. You're not going to know any of these people. So you're going to need to learn how to do some basic fundamental cold calling and cold emailing and leveraging LinkedIn and maybe some face-to-face sales when the opportunities come up, and maybe some networking and referrals. So these are all outreach strategies and how you can get shippers as a freight broker, okay? So this is one of the core components that is really challenging for some people. And I can tell you that that's the reason why I started my Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. Now, let me explain to you really quickly what that is. That is an 8-week live coaching program where I take that piece of my brain, I transplant it into your head, and I teach you everything I know about freight broker sales, strategies, tactics, tools. But most importantly, I teach you the same freight broker sales system that I used to do over $200 million as a freight broker, and what many of my students have went on to do to get many customers, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in revenue for their businesses, okay? So that is the Freight Broker Sales Accelerator. Again, it's currently sold out, but if you want to get on the wait list, you can check that out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com/waitlist. Okay. Again, freightbrokerbootcamp.com/waitlist. And you'll be the first to be notified when new spots open up. All right. So do me a favor. If you enjoyed this training, if you learned anything at all, make sure you hit the like button. And then in the comments, do me a huge favor and let me know, 1 to 10 how you rate this video. 1 is, Dennis, this was terrible and a complete waste of my time. 10 is, I absolutely loved it. Anywhere in between. If it's anything less than an 8, give me some feedback along with your ratings to let me know how I can improve this training, because I'm here for you. This is why I want to do this. I want to make this valuable for you. Listen, if you want to learn the 7 steps to become a freight broker, the 7 simple steps to become a freight broker, all you got to do is go to freightbrokerbootcamp.com/7 steps. You'll get a free download. You get a free cheat sheet that'll walk you through that entire process. So thank you guys for being here. Truly appreciate it. And we'll see you next week on the next Freight Broker Bootcamp Live.